Hey guys, it's Vignesh from CodeAndroid. In the previous tutorial, we created the splash screen of the To-Do app. In this video, we'll see how to create or update To-Do. We are going to use SQLite database in this project. To get that, search as SQLite Flutter. Open SQLite Flutter package. This is the dependency we are going to use. To copy the dependency, click on this copy icon. Then go to the project and open pubspec.yaml file. In this, we need to add the dependency into dependencies section. Once we add this, click on pubget. Now we'll create the database. For that, creating a new directory called a database, inside creating another file called to-do database. This is the class going to give the database instance, so making this as a singleton, so that the database will get opened only once. To make this as singleton, creating a private constructor and then creating a static to-do database instance and calling the private constructor. Finally, creating the factory constructor and return the static instance. Now we made this class as a singleton. Let's create the database instance. I don't want to create or initialize the database while creating the to-do database class, so making this database variable as late variable. Also, we want this database to be accessed outside, so creating the getter by right-clicking on the editor and selecting generate getter. In this dialog, select the database field. Creating a function called initialize to open the database. Opening the database is an asynchronous task, so making the function return type as future void. If we check the documentation, we need a path for the database. Then we can open the database using open database function. First, we'll create a variable for storing the database name and database version. Then adding the code for getting the database location. This join function is available in the path package, so adding the path package into our application. Here we are getting an error because Flutter's test package is using path plugin version 1.8.2. So I'm downgrading the plugin to 1.8.2 and syncing the project. You can see the dependencies got updated. Now we can import the path package for using the join function. Then changing the name from demo to database name. Now we got the path for the database. For opening the database, copying the sample code and pasting it here. In this, replacing the hard-coded version with DB version. Inside this onCreate, we need to create the table which is required for this application. First, we'll create the model required for the table. To keep those, creating a directory called model inside database and creating a file called to-do model. For the to-do, we need the to-do name and created a time as well as the ID so that we can uniquely identify the ID. So adding the ID as nullable integer because while creating the new to-do, we will not have its ID. Similarly, creating created with nullable and finally adding the name. In this to-do, the name is the mandatory field. So creating a constructor where making the name as mandatory and other fields as optional. For creating a table, we need the table name and column names. So creating those variables inside this class itself. Static constant string table name. I'm giving the table name as to do. Then creating three variables for keeping these three variables column name. Column ID for storing ID. Similarly creating column created at and column name. While creating a new database, we need to create this table. For that, we need a create query. So creating a function called getCreateQuery. inside returning the query. Create table name. Inside parenthesis, we need to add the column for this table along with its data type and properties. Here, column ID is an integer primary key as well as auto increment value for this table. Then we have column created at, which is a type of date time and giving the default value as current timestamp. So that when we create a new task, the created time will be inserted by the database itself. Finally, adding column name with varchar as its type. Now we have the create query. Using this DB object, we need to execute the query. When we try to open the database and if the database does not exist, then onCreate will get executed. If the user has a database and the database version is mismatched, then based on the old database version, either onUpgrade or onDowngrade will get executed, where we will get the old database version. Based on that, we can alter the tables. Now we need to initialize this database before we do any database operation. So opening the splash screen, here we are waiting for starting the next animation. In between this, I am going to initialize our database. So creating a to-do database object and calling initialize. Note that this initialize is an async function, so awaiting for its result. Before we start any UI code, let's complete the CRUD operation for to-do model. So creating a new file called todo for keeping all the database operation related to the to-do model. In this, we are going to write the function for add to do, update to do, delete to do and read to do. This add to do function is not going to return any data, so adding the return type as future void. Here adding database and to do model which we want to insert into the database as parameter. Now we can use database.insert for inserting the data. Inside this, we need to pass the table name and value. We have the table name defined inside to do model class, so passing that here. For values, we need to pass map of string of object. To get that, creating a function called toJSON in to do model. Inside this function, creating an empty map and returning it. In between this, we need to add the data into the map. If the ID is null, then we don't want to insert it in the map. Then only the database will give the value. So adding map of column ID equals to ID. Here I am using the column variable name because sometime we might have different variable name mapped to different column names. Similarly, adding created at after a null check and then adding name into the map. Using this function, we can insert the data into the database, but while reading the data from the database, we will get map of string of dynamic. For this, we need to create a model. So creating a factory constructor called from JSON, inside this returning to do model. For creating the to do model, we need to pass the name value first. So reading column name from JSON. Then passing ID and created it as named parameter. Let's go to the DAO. Here passing todo model.toJSON. If we check this insert, it's a future function. So we need to await for its result. For updating the data, we need to use database update function. Here we need to pass where and where arguments. Otherwise, it will replace all the rows with the same value. Here I want to update the row which is matching the column ID. To do that, we need to pass where condition as column ID equals to ID value. Here we can pass the ID value directly, otherwise we can pass a question mark. If we are passing the question mark, then we need to pass where argument. If we do this, the question mark will be replaced with the var argument value. Here we have only one question mark, so it will replace the question mark with an ID. In case if we have multiple question mark, then first question mark will be replaced with first value of the argument, second question mark with the second value, and so on. For delete, we need to call delete function. Here the only difference is we don't need values. Based on the var condition, the data gets deleted. Finally, for reading the data from the database, creating a function called getTodos with database as a parameter. Inside, creating a result variable with the type of list of to-do model and returning it. In between, we need to read the data from the database and update the result variable. To read the data from the database, we need to pass the table name to the query function. Here, we are not passing any other parameter because we want to read all the to-do from the table. This query function will return list of map of string. So we need to convert this into to-do model. So looping the query result and converting it into to-do model using from JSON constructor. We have completed the code for database. Now we can link this to the UI. First, we need the to-do database for database access, and then we need a to-do DAO for reading or writing the data on the database. In this screen, we will display the to-dos which are available. To store that, creating a local variable called to-dos. We need to read the to-dos from the database and update this variable inside initState function so that on launch we will have the value. Also, we need to update this variable at multiple places, so creating a function called update to-dos and calling that inside initState. Using to-do DAO, getting all the to-dos by passing the database object and waiting for the result. Once we update the to-do list, we need to update the UI, so calling setState. If we check the UI, we need to add the app name in the center and a grid view with 2 items in a row. To do that, adding app bar to the scaffold with the title text to-do list. Then adding a grid view as the body for the scaffold. For this grid view, we need to pass grid delegate, which is a type of sliver grid delegate. So passing sliver grid delegate with fixed cross-axis count with cross-axis count as 2, because we need 2 items in a row. We need to use grid view builder, so adding the builder. Before we write the code for the builder, let's set the count for the grid view. We are going to render this grid view using to-dos list, so setting the item count as to-dos length. Inside the builder, returning a card with text as its child. In this text widget, displaying the name using the index which we are getting from the builder. Let's hot reload the app. You can see we got the app bar, but the color is not as same as the design. To achieve that, we need to make some changes in the app theme. So opening main.dart. In this, we need to add app bar theme as app bar theme with background color as colors.green. Also, we need to customize the floating action button theme. So adding floating action button theme as floating action button theme data with background color as colors.green and foreground color as colors.white. Now in the to-do screen, adding a floating action button with icon as its child. For this icon, passing icons.add. I want to use material3 for this application, so adding use material3 flag as true in the theme data. Let's restart the application. You can see the app bar and fab buttons UI got updated. On click of this fab button, we want to show a dialog using which user can add to do. So creating a function called add to do. Inside, calling show dialog with context and builder. Inside this builder, returning an alert dialog with title as add to do text and content as text field. By clicking the action button, we need to retrieve the text entered from the text field, so creating a text editing controller and passing it to the text field. In this text field, we need to show the hint, so adding the decoration as input decoration with hint text as to do name. Finally, adding the action buttons. Text button with text cancel as its child. On click of this button, we want to dismiss the dialog, so calling navigator.pop. Duplicating the button and changing the text to add. Here, before closing the dialog, checking the entered value. If the entered value is not empty, then adding the to do using add to do. Sorry, this is a to do DAO, so changing task to do. For this add to do, passing the database, then creating a new to do model by passing the value from the text field. Once we add the value, we need to update the to do list, so calling update to dos. Here we are getting this warning because we are trying to use the context after an async call. We need to use context only if the widget is mounted, so adding is mounted check before using the context. Let's save the code. On click of this swap button, nothing is happening. Sorry, I forgot to use this add to do function on the fab button. Now you can see on click of the button, we are getting the pop-up. Here, user can enter the to do name and then add it to the database. You can see the data got added to the database and then the grid view is refreshing. Here, the pop-up is coming, but the keyboard is not focusing. To make the keyboard focused, we need to add autofocus as true. You can see now on click of the fab button, we are getting the pop-up along with the keyboard. Finally, we need to add the menu button on the right side of the name where user gets edit, delete and mark as complete option. For now, we will skip this mark as complete option because it is related to the task. To add this option, I am creating an enum. To store these kind of common properties, creating a new folder called common. Inside, creating a file called enum.dart. Inside, create an enum called to do option with edit, delete and mark as completed as value. On the design, we have some gap between the text and the code, so wrapping the text using padding. Also, we need the pop-up button next to the task name, so wrapping the text using row. Inside this children, adding pop-up menu button. In this, the builder need to return list of pop-up menu entry and has context as a parameter. Before that, this pop-up menu requires a type, so passing the type as to do option. Inside the builder, returning the list of pop-up menu item with text as its child and to do option as its value. This pop-up menu item value need to be same type as the pop-up menu button type. Now I'm duplicating the item and converting it into delete option. You can see we are getting the pop-up. To handle this item click, we need to add onSelected callback where we get the user selected value. If the selected value is edit, then we need to update the to do. If the selection is delete, then we need to delete the to do. First, we'll do the delete. For this, we need to call delete to do from to do DAO. Here, passing the database and to do model as to dos of index. After deleting the to do, calling update to do function to reflect the change. Let's save the code. You can see the to do got deleted. Now we'll see about edit. For edit, I want to reuse the same dialog. So renaming the function as add or update to do, then passing an optional parameter called old to do. Now while showing the dialog, I want to pre-fill the text field with old to do's name. So adding default text for the controller. If the to do name is not empty, then passing the name, otherwise passing empty. Also I want to change the dialog title. So checking if old to do is null, then show add, otherwise show update. Here also we'll use the same logic instead of hard coding add. On click of this action button, instead of directly inserting the data, based on the condition, we need to add or update the to do. If old to do is null, then adding the to do using add to do. Otherwise, updating the old to do's name with the text field value and then calling update to do from to do DAO. Here passing the database and old to do as the parameter. Now we need to call this function on click of the edit menu. Here passing the optional parameter old to do as to do's of index. Let's save the code. You can see on click of the edit menu, we are getting the pop-up with update to do as the title. I'm removing the last character and updating the to do. You can see the to do list got updated. We don't want to see the menu button nearby the name, so wrapping the name using expanded. Also, we'll make this icon as vertical dot. To accomplish this, we need to add a child as an icon for the pop-up menu button. I don't remember the icon name, so searching for material icon Flutter and opening Google Fonts page. This icon is called more vertical, so adding the icon more vertical. You can see we got the menu with vertical dot icon. In next video, we'll see how to make this card clickable and go inside a to-do and then manage the task for the to-do inside. That's all for this video guys. If you have any doubt, please put them in the comment section. I will try to answer it. Hope you like it. I will see you in my next video. Have a nice day.